Hello, good afternoon and welcome back. Or hello if you've just joined us. This is the final session of day one of this conference, looking at how the cyber security landscape is changing, looking at how threats are evolving, and considering how the industry is positioned to actually meet those changing threats. We're going to kick off with a chat between Ciaran Martin, who's former CEO of the National Cybersecurity Centre, and it's going to be hosted by Jude McCorry, CEO of the Scottish Business Resilience. I knew I was going to fluff that. Scottish Business Resilience Centre. I should have worn my own teeth today. Jude, over to you.
Good afternoon. I just started giggling now. Thank you very much for that introduction, and welcome, Ciaran, all the way from down south into Scotland today.
Thank you very much.
As you can see, we have no fire, so sorry about that. But yeah, we'll hopefully.
You can try if you want. But
no, it's okay. No, let's get serious now. Okay. So before we get into this session, I want to basically for you to give us a bit of an overview on your background and your career around cyber.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. Nice to talk virtually to the team in Cybersecurity Scotland. So I'm Ciaran Martin. I'm now working at Oxford University. I'm on Jude's board and the SBRC, but for 23 years I was in Whitehall as a civil servant, and the last 6.5 of those were running cybersecurity. So I went to GCHQ at the start of 2014, and it was, as it might suggest, a very sort of secret job dealing with state attacks, not much sort of transparency, not much external engagement, because that's the nature of secret intelligence work. But I think over time we started to realize that the so-called cliche, the cliche, and like all cliches, it's got a modicum of truth in it, that cybersecurity is a team sport, meant that doing something 100 miles from London in one of the most secure buildings in the country with no mobile phones was going to have its limitations. You did need the elite capabilities to see off some of the most potent threats, but there was a whole bunch of things around basic attacks, information sharing, best practice advice on passwords and so forth that you needed really to rethink. So we set up a hybrid, if you like, the National Cybersecurity Centre, which was in the intelligence world, but behaved very differently, defaulted to openness rather than secrecy and so forth. I'm sure we'll cover some of this in the rest of the conversation. But it was a novel and interesting experiment that seems broadly to have worked, and certainly it seems to have support and has been copied around the world. And I was privileged to lead that. It came into existence in at the end of 2016, and I led it for its first 4 years. So that's my story.
Excellent. And you must have seen some major changes from when you started to when you finished to actually now as well.
Well, I know you're a French linguist, Jude, so you can say this in its original French, but there is a bit about that wonderful phrase about the more things change, the more they are the same. There are changes in the in the way we approach cybersecurity, but and there are changes in the threat landscape as we'll come on to. But there's quite a lot of continuity. I think one of the things that's changed the most is we're a lot more activists now as government and as a community. If I can slightly unfairly parody the approach of sort of 10 years ago, which was largely imported from the States, and the States has moved on to this as well, it was government should have elite capabilities that are as good as possible, but very secret. Nobody understands them and nobody really knows what they do. And then everything else you sort of leave to the private sector. And you encourage the private sector to share information and have public-private partnerships with government, but no further details. It's not really sure what that means beyond conferences and committees and so on. And I think at the NCSC, because we had some brilliant technical people, and one of the things I learned most, I mean, I'm a history graduate, I had no background in cybersecurity, was that sort of digital translator stuff. So, harnessing the experts and some world-class experts there and sort of talking to them about, why are we underachieving in cybersecurity? And that's what led to the more interventionist stance. So firstly, there was something about just managing it as a sort of digital public health. So if you contrast, say, when the telco TalkTalk was hacked in 2015 versus the WannaCry ransomware attack in 2017, and look at the different approach of the government, we did have people, much like the chief medical officers out now during the pandemic, saying, in the second case, saying, this is the problem, here's who's at risk, here's who's not at risk, here's what you're at risk of, and so on. on, and here's how to mitigate the damage. So that was one thing we did differently. Other things was we just started doing national risk management. In a country the size of the UK, you can't protect everything, but you have to protect some things more than others, and the SBRC obviously does that really well in Scotland. What are those things and how do you protect them? Is it the smart meter system? Is it the 5G network and so on? The third and fourth were the most interesting things because they were the most innovative, and it was about fixing structural problems in the internet. Why is there so much spoofing going on? Well, because people aren't using DMARC because they don't have a commercial incentive to use it, even though it's free. So why don't we promote it and find ways of doing that? And showing some experiments. So when we did the experiment with the tax authority at HMRC, and we stopped 500 million spoof emails in 1 year. And then the final thing, which I was really excited about, was we banished the whole psychology around people are the weakest link, which I've always thought was a really stupid way of approaching cybersecurity, because it's like saying sports teams, the weakest link in them are the players. So we started doing things like reforming password policy and so on, to make it easier for competent people who have other things to worry about than cybersecurity to be safe online. So there's a very different approach now in the UK. It's stabilising now, and we've been at it for about 5 years. It's shown some decent results. So I think there's a bit more optimism and pragmatism about it. 5 years ago, there were all those sort of dreadful scaremongering videos about everything blowing up and you not being able to do about it. I hope we've been able to change that.
Okay, excellent. What do you think are the emerging trends and threats? We'll take the trends first.
Well, so this is where, the more things change, the more they are the same. If you'd asked me this 6 months ago, I would have said the second part of what I want to say. But in the last 6 months, we've had a reminder of some of the old classics. So if you go over to our friends in the US, I know we've got Bob Carver coming on next, distinguished cybersecurity commentator from there. But you look at something like the SolarWinds hack, which is new in terms of its sophistication and scale, but actually it's very old-fashioned in another sense about digital espionage. So that's we can move on to sort of the next generation of threats, but we're not over the last lot. And of course, we've had the apparently Chinese compromise of Microsoft Exchange recently. But I think the main sort of trend in terms of old-fashioned cyber risks is ransomware, which has got almost out of control, deeply damaging. Some stuff from my old organisation out today about attacks on the sector I know working down south of the border at universities and ransomware. So I think a harsh reminder that both at sort of state level, in terms of SolarWinds, but also at sort of consumer level in terms of ransomware, that we haven't quite cracked some of the major threats yet. But as we move ahead, actually, I would like to strike a note of optimism. I know that's unusual in cybersecurity, where we tend to all to be doom and gloom, and there's a bit of self-reinforcement about that narrative, which I think is dangerous. But I think here's an opportunity. If you look at the difference between, one of the key differences between now and, say, 10 years ago, is that I think now we broadly know what the next generation of technology is going to look like. Not exactly, but we know enough about it. IoT is here and getting bigger. Parts of AI are on the way. 5G is on its way. Quantum will arrive at some point in the distant future. So unlike 25 years ago, when the California model of free web-based services, which you gave lots of personal data into in order so they wouldn't charge you, which turned out accidentally, I don't think it was deliberate, but turned out accidentally to be a structural disaster for security and privacy. I think we can see all this coming. So IoT is my favorite example. The UK government's legislating for higher standards in IoT products. IoT, as the T suggests, stuff you can hold. There's hardware in it. You can insist on proper standards. You can regulate it. You can give consumers ways of making informed choices. So at the minute, if you want to buy a car, you can pay more for a more secure and safer car. If you want to look for a digital service, it's very hard to pay more for security. I think in IoT you can fix that, and you can bring that approach into technology of the future. So yeah, sure, there are all sorts of new threats. I'm worried about proliferation of cyber weapons. I think we we don't understand fully enough that very dangerous and difficult market that goes on in the hidden world in cyber weapons and hackers for hire and all of that stuff. But there are grounds for optimism too.
Detail around that, that, because I think a lot of people see the headline stuff around that, the warfare, but they don't really understand how it can be used like that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we hear a lot of stuff about cyber war, and I could reach over, but it's a bit far away. The famous book by Professor Thomas Rid in 2013, Cyber War Will Not Take Place. And I think there's a lot of lazy sort of rhetoric about, states, mature and competent states, even if they're not very nice, like Russia, for example. I think they're highly unlikely to do things in cyberspace that they wouldn't do in the physical world because they know the consequences would be the same. So I think some of that hype is actually quite unhelpful. On the other hand, there is increasing evidence of people hiring hackers, having access, buying fairly potent malware and deploying it and so forth. I think that's something we have to watch very, very carefully. I think there's been some really good law enforcement and intelligence service action on the offensive side against some of the criminal botnets and so forth. But I think we need to, one of the things I find slightly frustrating, I understand why military types, and I do some work for NATO and I'm very passionate about it. I understand why military strategists talk about cyberspace as a domain of operations, because it is. But I don't think it's primarily a domain of operations. It's primarily an environment where all of us live and work all the time, and particularly in the last year, and that's what we're doing now, and that's what we've been doing all year. So, that digital environment is something we've got to keep as clean as possible, and there's an awful lot of pollutants sloshing around, and people can sort of weaponize those, and I think we need to be really, really careful about that. So I'd like to see a greater understanding and more coordinated international action around that sort of risk.
And do you think that Scotland's got a part to play in that? Because sometimes I think we're a bit oblivious to what's going on around that area. That is it something that goes on outside of Scotland, and is there something we should be thinking about and we should be working with others around it?
So I think there's something that Scotland does very well, and then something that probably could develop further at. So the thing that Scotland does very well, and that's why I was very happy to join the board of the SBRC, is I think it does resilience well, and that is the necessary but not completely sufficient condition for it. So Scotland, the hackneyed phrase about its Goldilocks size, but it's, again, like as I said earlier, like all cliches, it has a modicum of truth in it, and the fact that the population tends to, and the leadership of it tends to be clustered in two cities that aren't very far away from each other, and so on, means that government, emergency services, critical industry, and so on, can all get together pretty quickly and coordinate everything. And I think, the SBRC and other partners, law enforcement and so on, have done a really good job over a number of years to build in resilience into it. So, response and resilience are very, very good in Scotland. But I take the point, the inference in your question is, well, that's all fine, in terms of the internal protection of Scotland. I think there's probably more that Scotland as a country can do to engage with partners in trying to clean up the wider digital environment. And some of that's about the best practice in resilience. Some of that is actually, there is a gigantic cybersecurity industry out there with huge amounts of threat information that's beyond the capacity of any government. Governments will have the sort of top end of the of the threat picture, but I think there's more to do to leverage that, to look imaginatively, including with the powers that are already devolved, to look imaginatively at some of the sort of standards and regulatory innovations you can use to incentivize better cybersecurity. I think there is more that can be done there, but I wouldn't want to be particularly down on Scotland's performance in cybersecurity. I think there's a lot going for it.
And building on that, is there ways that we can increase, not just around the cyber warfare and that or threat intelligence, but is there areas that we should be doing more collaboration on? And where have you seen, okay, we'll concentrate on that one instead of giving you 2 or 3 questions. So people we should be collaborating with outside of Scotland, instead of having this Goldilocks economy image that we are, and particularly coming out of COVID and lockdown, that we do take up the challenge and also continue with the conversations we had globally rather than being seen as insular?
Well, I think there is something around innovation in cybersecurity. So I think the continent of Europe as a whole, whether in or out of the EU or any of that, is, I think, increasingly seized of the fact that whether it comes to technology as a whole, or indeed the cybersecurity subset of it, there isn't an awful lot of indigenous capacity there. There's some brilliant research. I mean, the Edinburgh universities and others in Scotland that the National Cybersecurity Centre have awarded sort of its elite status to are very, very good, and there's some good spin-offs and all of that. But I think, given the, it's a relatively high-tech country with a good record in cybersecurity, there's probably more opportunity to expand out of that. To go back to something I said earlier, if you take sort of the narrative when I started was all about public-private partnerships and so on. We said, look, if you want a public-private partnership, could the private, what's the bit you want the private sector to actually do as opposed to talk about? So, where are some of the more technologically astute but affordable solutions to ransomware, for example? Why aren't we developing more of those? I help advise a US venture capital firm, and I think they're scouring Europe for opportunities to get into these sort of innovations and so forth. And I think there are two sets of opportunities. One is the existing technology we've got. We haven't fixed ransomware, we haven't fixed supply chain breaches, we haven't fixed all of this. But then there's a whole bunch of things about the next generation of technology. And when I look at it, when I look at the UK, there are bits, there are clusters in and around Edinburgh, there are clusters in and around bits of South Wales, Malvern, London, Cambridge and so forth, but there's no sort of superpower. You look across Europe, there's bits around in parts of Ireland, parts of Cyprus, Poland, but there's not. So I think there is a real untapped market and talent pool that could do more, particularly in the commercial sector, to strategically help with some of these problems and create some economic growth while we're at it, which we will need post-COVID.
Excellent. And have you seen any bits of innovation that excite you in your role in Palladium?
Well, lots. There have been, I think, so there's the sort of technical and human, which I think is a good way of thinking about cybersecurity. So at the technical level, there have been some promising things we've seen about, ransomware, some promising things we've seen about using AI to do threat detection at larger scale. But the human dimension has been really interesting. And some interesting things. I'm doing a session later today for a Swiss company on cloud, on confidential security in cloud, which I think post the Microsoft Hafnium hack is going to be a significantly greater priority for a larger number of organizations. But what's interesting when you look across the sort of startup thing is how much of it is in human capital, how much is about training software developers and so forth. I think there's something really genuinely interesting about that. Because to come back to what I was saying earlier about, the digital realm as an environment, there is something about I suspect, I might be completely wrong, but within the next 25 years, we will start talking about things like the right to safer software. There will be an expectation that you can't just write rubbish code anymore. You can't just punt stuff out. There's going to have to be sort of higher standards, an ecosystem where people get called out or prevented from doing all of this stuff. And so I think some of the more interesting companies that I've come across, are really good at doing some of that training, providing some of those, I know you've got a bunch of ethical hackers at the SBRC and stuff like that, a bunch of people who are really, really looking at how do you do more secure software and hardware. There are really good researchers in Belfast on hardware security, for example. So that's the sort of thing that I find genuinely exciting. And hopefully, policy, governments and international agreements, so policy and private sector capacity have to keep at roughly the same pace. So I hope if the policy breakthrough happens, that there's enough sort of private sector innovation to keep pace with it.
So now I'm going to have all the hackers messaging me now about ideas around more secure software.
Well, of course, your hackers are wonderful and profoundly dangerous people, but we love them and they do a great job.
definitely texting now. There was another. So we've already covered the international cooperation and how do we protect ourselves. Is there any? So what we're doing at SBRC, I'm always looking for other countries that we can, liaise with to see best practice and stuff like that. And we are, we're still quite young in our journey around cyber. Is there anywhere that you think around the world we should be looking at for best practice and where they've done it really well?
So nowhere is perfect. Nowhere has everything, and so it depends what you want. So here's where I learned from. I'm not going to lecture anybody and say this is what you should do. But when I was in the UK government, here are some of the best partnerships. I mean, for just pure, and this is obviously very different for a country of Scotland's size or even a country of the UK's size, but, for just pure raw technological power, the United States is phenomenal. And I think, we're privileged to be able as an ally to harness that. When I was looking at protection of government networks, I always thought Canada was superb, and I always thought Canada did something, and because obviously, government's an important sector in any country. Canada did something really obvious, but most governments can't do it or don't do it well, which is it does digital and digital security at the same time, and weirdly, and I've said this openly, the UK, I think has done digital government pretty well and has done cybersecurity pretty well. One of the problems is it did one 5 years after the other. So you had in 2010 with the government digital service, you had a real revolution. President Obama sort of said it was brilliant and tried to copy it for the US, but actually I think that partly accidentally, partly deliberately, because they thought that an unreformed security establishment would slow down digitization. The UK government went ahead and did lots of digitization without looking properly at security, and then the National Cybersecurity Centre 5 years later had to retrofit it in Canada. And I think Estonia have done this very well. You say, right, here's what digital public services are going to look like, and here's the appropriate risk judgment on security for that. So then you look at other things. When you look at spinning off commercial growth out of cybersecurity, everybody talks about Israel, and that's justified, but it's justified by looking at it properly and critically. There's a certain amount of hype about it, but a lot of it is very, very impressive. I think in critical infrastructure protection, I actually think that the UK has got a very good story to tell, and should be seen as if not best practice, then at least close to it. Not least because I remember a conscious decision, and I think Scotland, within the UK is particularly good at this. I think there was a very interesting set of discussions about 3 or 4 years ago where a lot of continental Europe was going towards legal definitions of critical infrastructure. We always were very sort of hesitant about that, and I think we were proved right by the pandemic, because if you look at what mattered at the start of 2020, it was very different from what was most critical at the end of 2020. I work at the University of Oxford, and bits of the University of Oxford became critical infrastructure in the course of 2020, and I'm obviously talking about vaccines, very small little research institutes with people who never previously had to worry about cybersecurity. We're now at the centre of the great geopolitical contest of our time. So I think that sort of flexible and adaptive approach to critical infrastructure is actually done very well in the UK. So the long-winded answer is there's nowhere perfect, but there's plenty of good practice. Just look for the right things in the right countries.
And do you think we package it well, what we do well? I don't think we do in Scotland. I think we need to start doing that better to sell ourselves. And I don't know about the UK either. I think, are we just looking at best practice elsewhere and thinking everybody else is perfect?
Well, I think there's a thing around, it depends what you want to, it depends what message you want to get across. I think that, if you do talk to international businesses, the UK has a decent reputation in as a place to do digital business, and security is a decent part of that, a decent part of that narrative. And I think, but if you're looking at things like, cyber growth and so forth, then I think there's a lot more that could usefully be done to get that message out. I also think, the UK needs to, think very carefully about how it wants to present itself. There is a huge opportunity in the coming years, particularly with the rise of China's alternative. I mean, we talk about China and Russia as if they're interchangeable threats. They're not. They're completely different. Russia is, it's a sort of it's a turbocharged tactical threat by messing around on the internet we currently have. China's building its own alternative one, and it's genuinely terrifying in terms of, its authoritarianism, its surveillance, and all the rest of it. And shoring up that, I think about saying, right, here is how you have an open, free, liberal, communicative, democratic, rules-based internet, but it works and it's efficient. Doing that, I think, is a big opportunity. But then we need to make sure that we're not overdoing the cyber war rhetoric and so forth, because we will need other countries to come with us on that journey. And there's a risk that they won't if they think that we are also being very aggressive in cyberspace.
Okay. That's excellent. We have a few questions, which we probably should ask now because we've only got four minutes to go. Who in the UK is planning to regulate wireless device protocols, given the number of wireless exploit chain vulnerabilities in current deployed wireless systems?
Well, that's a nice, easy one. Ofcom will be the regulator for telecoms. I mean, there's a new digital security telecom security bill going through, which strengthens the powers of Ofcom in that respect. Because to be honest, most of the answer to that historically has been nobody. And I think that's one of the sort of structural challenges we've had in cyber security in the UK, because we've had a bunch of telecommunications and other service providers who have been incentivized to have as low consumer prices as possible, understandably, to have as low roaming charges between different jurisdictions as possible, again understandably, but they've not been incentivized to be able to to bake sort of security into the pricing system. So I suspect the answer to that is Ofcom, but I think the UK has woken up just as late as other countries, probably earlier than other countries, but a bit later than a lot of us would have liked, to the need to do this sort of thing.
Okay. And then the second was to build brand new systems and build in good security at the same time greatly increases your time to delivery. In crisis situations, how do you strike the balance? I suppose we've lived through that in the last year, haven't we?
Yeah, I mean, does it? Does actually building in security at the start? I mean, I remember Universal Credit, where one of the reasons why it went back to the starting board was that actually security wasn't planned in at the start. And then actually when you did it in that, and again, this goes back to what I said about digital government, when you did it in that sort of agile way properly, and you said, well, we can do this bit and here's the security arrangements and so forth. And the one sort of guiding principle was that there was no gigantic off button, single off button. Then I think, it means you don't have to repent at leisure. Now, crisis is a different matter. So if you are building something in normal times, then I think security is now an essential. Crisis is a different matter, and I think when you look at the National Cybersecurity Centre under my leadership was always preaching risk management as the key in good cybersecurity. And what we did last March, a year ago today, in any other circumstance would have been crazy. Taking basically the entire country that isn't prepared to work at home and send it home to work on remote devices. So when there is a crisis, risk calculations change and people took more risks, and the NCSC endorsed those risks because they were essential for public health and public protection. But the risk calculus changed. We sent out sensible, practical advice to mitigate the risks, which you wouldn't normally have countenanced. And funnily enough, brilliantly, major security disasters were avoided because they would have been so damaging at the start of the pandemic if we'd got security wrong. So I think where possible, just build in security, because otherwise you'll repent at leisure. When it is a crisis, adjust your risk calculation and do what you need to do.
Yeah. Okay. Well done. And we're on the button. Half an hour, Ciaran.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. And the dogs are getting barking.
Stephen's job anytime soon, because I found that going, that was a bit.
To be frank, what you did a bit too well. I was getting a bit nervous about that.
Right.
Jude, listen, thank you very much for that. And Ciaran, always fascinating hearing you speak. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Jude.
Jude will be rejoining us shortly because we've got a panel discussion at the end of the day. But first off, we're going to have Bob Carver. Principal Cybersecurity Threat Intelligence at Verizon. Bob's across in the States at the moment, and he's looking at cybersecurity now and the future and asking the question, I don't know what the answer is, are we ready? Bob.
Hey, thank you very much. A pleasure to be here. Some say we're in the midst of a cyber war, and maybe that's why a lot of us are gathering here today. What seemed not long ago, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon, said that cyber attacks may be the biggest risk to our financial system. There was a report from Carbon Black that financial institutions had a 67% increase in cyber attacks over the last 12 months. And then also a lot of 32% of the firms indicated they were experiencing counter threat response, attackers fighting back and to protect their embedded systems within the networks. The report found a 160% increase in destructive cyber attacks, which aim to wipe data and render whole systems inoperable. Cyber criminals have changed their tactics. Before, they would perform bank heists. Basically, they would break in and take the money and run. Now they want to have a hostage situation. They don't want to leave the victim alone. They want to maintain their presence in the institution, and they're willing to fight back, even if it means damage and destruction. Data breaches and cyber attacks targeting banks have increased substantially in the UK as well. Financial services are now the tip of the spear when it comes to bearing the brunt of cyber attacks. The industry is having to respond to growing attack services, a dynamic adversary, and the implementation of new mobile services and an ever more complex punitive regulatory regimes. FireEye recent analysis of worldwide attack data shows that the financial industry and the fintech as a whole is the #1 most attacked sector. And of course, the pandemic hit. Hospitals, schools, and businesses being shut down by ransomware, adding to the difficulties and stress of keeping those institutions running while also battling COVID-19. COVID-themed phishing emails spiked to all-time highs. Recently, there's been another wave due to the changes in local rules, regulations, and distribution of vaccines. Ransom being demanded is up to tens of millions of dollars for larger institutions. And one of the most recent cyber attacks that was announced was for ransomware was with Acer Electronics. And so far, the attackers have demanded $50 million to decrypt their computers. During this time, many of us had to connect to offices remotely. Some institutions were ready to do this in a secure manner. Many were not. Digital transformation has happened at a higher rate, stretching the capacity of remote web conference platforms and moving projects from bare metal servers to the cloud. Communication companies pushed into production 5G and satellites, and they're in the process of covering the globe for internet connectivity with speeds faster than many people have in their homes and offices. Automated factories may be interconnected with offices all over the world. Smart cities are starting to evolve. Automobiles are connected to the internet for software updates, navigation services, and emergency services. With all this progress, cyber attack services grown geometrically, and the technology to protect all this digital transformation often is not progressed as fast as the digital transformation itself. Sorry. Encrypted traffic. Visibility is key. Methods to decrypt traffic or analyze metadata on encrypted packets will become mandatory in order to detect malicious intent. Due to the majority of malicious traffic now being encrypted, our traditional security monitoring systems, intrusion detection systems, may become blind as a result. Currently, TLS version 1.2 and 1.3 are current standards. TLS 1.3 makes monitoring traffic extremely difficult, if not impossible. So much so that it is believed to be illegal now in China. It's also rumored that Russia is in process of putting together laws that will make the TLS 1.3 protocol illegal. To add to the theme of visibility is a new vendor term, XDR, Extended Detection and Response. This is often pushed now as a marketing term that describes a specific technology. However, this is where many of us should be planning to put in place in our network environments. The idea that is you have visibility and automation into your network traffic, servers, computer workstations in the cloud, seeing the processes, process trees, and the accompanying data flows, whether it be to and from the internet or to and from one computer platform to another. Threat hunting. There are almost as many definitions of threat hunting as there are security practitioners that attempt to describe or give a definition to threat hunting. My definition is to discover malicious or anomalous traffic in a network or endpoints, servers, cloud, etc., that is happening now and may not have been detected by traditional security monitoring. This involves traffic flows over wired, wireless, or non-traditional data flows, computer endpoint to endpoint, known as lateral movement, or computer endpoint to and from the internet. This also includes monitoring all process trees, data, whether it's on disk and memory, monitoring changes to system registries, etc. Much of the traditional threat intelligence will show you a slow-moving cyber criminal organizations or simply provide you a clear view to what has happened in the past, basically a view in your rear view mirror. The largest organizations should have a threat hunting teams to augment their security operations team. While an incident response team acts like a group of firefighters, threat hunting team can perform like a special ops organization, proactively finding threats and neutralizing them before they grow any further. AI, machine learning, and data science. Some say AI, machine learning, neural networks, data science will solve all of our cybersecurity problems. For example, Sophos Security, they had one project to identify malicious domains and websites. They had a team of data science experts, between 14 to 16 experts. They did a more advanced form of data science called neural networks modeling, a little more sophisticated than just traditional machine learning. And they narrowed this down over time to 5,000 variables, fine-tuning each variable to optimize the model and utilizing, most likely, many petabytes of data. Sophos made great advancements in identifying malicious domains and websites. But how many companies have this type of resources, 14 to 16 data scientists? Very few. But they're going to have to continue to update this model over time. But also many cybersecurity programs will have to purchase this type of technology from other vendors since they won't have the resources with this size of data science teams. But a dirty little secret, AI machine learning is good at discerning bad from good when the differences are well defined. When there's subtle shades of gray, when traditional good processes are slightly modified to wreak havoc, AI can have a much more difficult time. When cybersecurity utilize common computer processes for malicious purposes, it's usually called living off the land. This makes it more difficult for AI and machine learning to distinguish normal computer activity from malicious activity. Cyber attackers have already started attempting to generate traffic and processes that are malicious in such a way that they appear to be normal baseline traffic to machine learning. This fools the machine learning into detecting this activity as normal malicious activity. Botnets have already been coded to run autonomously. code that utilizes a type of machine learning so that once it infects the victim, it continue making progress in compromising a network without the telltale beaconing of command and control, telling the bot what to do next. Will machine learning and data science continue to be part of the solution to cyber attacks in the future? Absolutely. Will AI be utilized by the cyber attackers? Of course. Will AI and machine learning be a silver bullet to all of our cyber attacks? Probably not. Will cyber attacks and cyber defenders eventually become AI versus AI? Quite likely. One of my articles, Cybersecurity Predictions and Wish List, stated that the year would be the army of IoT botnets that would wreak havoc on the internet. Sure enough, soon after that article was published, Mirai, Reaper, and the likes came along and showed what a little code and enough bots could do with relatively little effort. It was said that 85 websites were crippled for hours at a time. And as we're speaking, IoT botnets are ramping up in real time. My question to you is, who's going to take responsibility and at what time? Will it be the owner or purchaser of the IoT device, the manufacturer of the IoT device, the ISP that provides the internet connectivity, the government? The US has drafted IoT legislation into law and made the Internet of Things devices safer, and they've tapped cybersecurity experts to be able to draft this legislation. Unfortunately, much of this legislation is aimed at purchases of IoT by the federal government. Hopefully one day we'll have legislation that will cover a larger portion of the public. My wish is the rest of the world follow this example, much like the EU leads the world in privacy laws. So have more IoT legislation that will give us a roadmap of who will be responsible when things goes awry. James Clapper, who's the former U.S. intelligence chief, made his announcement that the next wave of cyber attacks won't steal data. They'll simply change it, modify a field or record with incorrect data, or simply eliminate the entire fields and records and possibly destroy entire databases. We need to think more like a criminal and bad actor. Traditional concern has been for data exfiltration. The risk we have now is for damage or manipulations of systems out of spite and frustration. Quite some time ago, the Shamoon malware was a destructive cyber attack of Saudi Aramco, and it is a classic example from our history books. It took out 30,000 computers in a very short time in 2012. It took 10 days of 24/7 recovery to become somewhat operational, and it took many months of recovery to become fully operational. Also, things like Shamoon are not limited to the petroleum sector. Attacks could target other industries as well. In a more recent cyber attack, NotPetya was originally thought to be a traditional ransomware attack. It actually damaged files and modified computers so they were unable to be restored. This attack was used in Ukraine to take down much of the critical infrastructure, such as the electric grid. However, this malware continued to spread and took out many other commercial operations, such as the shipping lines Maersk, the pharmaceutical company Merck, FedEx, among many others. The estimated damage was well over $10 million. Many of the insurance companies claimed this was an act of war or force majeure, and since these clauses in their policies would cause non-payment for any of these claims. The trend we may continue to see today is large cyber attacks such as SolarWinds, whether they may or may not get paid by the insurance companies. Hack your employees or social engineering. The Wall Street Journal interviewed a man that tests businesses for their gullibility to social engineering. The Wall Street Journal asks, what are the top 2 or 3 things employees always seem to fall for? Social engineer says, one kind that recently got me was something like, dear driver, on such and such date, your license plate was recorded running a red light at the corner of 5th and 6th Avenue. You failed to come to the hearing and a warrant for your arrest has been issued. Please click here to pay your fine. And a lot of times they'll send it to people and they'll even have the wrong address. Anyway, and a high percentage of people end up paying because they're afraid they're going to be arrested at their workplace. They said, you got another? Since we did a job recently where our goal was to get people's social security or national ID numbers, dates of birth, their full names, their employee IDs. And we just called the employee and to say, Paul, this is we're from HR. There's a problem. Your records have been flagged as being deleted, and we need some information to be able to put back into the system. If we don't have this, there may be some problems with your benefits and your next paycheck. And of course, the vast majority of these people don't do any checks and end up giving their entire life's history, plenty of information to commit identity theft. Often testing employees for social engineering and phishing attacks may bring some needed awareness that can help educate your employees to keep from falling from one of these traps. Of course, phishing emails can compromise employees' computers or have the employee reveal critical information like passwords. However, you want to do these types of trainings correctly. I have a couple examples of what not to do if you're doing training for phishing for employees. First one, send a phishing email that talks about a new bonus that everybody will be getting at the end of the month and use that as a phishing test. You'll find out probably a large portion of the people will flunk that one. Next one, in our current time, send an email that offers sign up for COVID vaccines. Again, a bad situation. Let's don't do that. Generally, employees are taught to be helpful. Will your employee fall victim to being an unwitting insider threat via social engineering? And how much time each year do you utilize to train employees to not fall for these scams? Are your detection and controls really working? Controls need to be tested and audited from time to time. Just because you have controls in place doesn't mean they're effective, even if they were at one time. Just like this gated arm in the picture here, it was installed with a mechanism to limit who can park in the parking lot where there may be limited availability of parking. However, for whatever reason, a fence was not installed to keep people from going around this control. Not fully implementing or not fully testing controls in this case is as poor as no control at all. Your team's visibility into your security controls may not make your vulnerabilities that obvious. You can add cyber hygiene to your list of controls. Have all your vulnerabilities been patched on a regular basis? Has the time from vulnerability discovery to testing the patch and rolling out the patch will need to continue to be faster than ever to elude attackers looking for the next quick compromise. And are you prioritizing patching according to those vulnerabilities that are actually being attacked? Recent studies showed that only 2.6% of the vulnerabilities over the last couple of years were actually being attacked on a regular basis in the wild. And how about, do you test your vendors? If your vendor tells you they can do X, Y, and Z without any issues, no problem. Do you attempt to test X, Y, and Z and see if the vendor claimed it was true? I have, and it didn't always work out so well for the vendor. Insider threat. Loyalty, how much will it cost? How much would it take to bribe your employees to sell company or state secrets? Security firm ClearSwift several years ago came up with an estimate a few years back on a survey of 4,000 workers in the UK, Australia, USA, and Germany that, of course, this was a few years ago, but A full quarter would sell their employer's data for as little as £5,500, 6,500 euros, or $7,500 if nobody was to find out. Up the rewards to £5,500, and a third would be open to the idea of a bribe if they were not found out. Question is, do you value your employees? Do your employees value your organization? Swift Bank was believed that much of the hijacking of funds transfers have been aided by at least one or more insiders in the organization. Barclays Bank, it was believed that the sale of 2,700 customers' information, including passport numbers, national insurance numbers, earnings, etc., was facilitated by an insider and was sold on the dark web. Bank of America insider sold customer information to outsiders, causing the bank over a $10 million loss. The FBI has indicated that many of these breaches that we've seen in the news have either witting or willing internal accomplices, or unwitting PCR servers have been unknowingly compromised by visiting websites or clicking on email links and attachments. There is the possibility of social engineering with unwitting targets. There's a possibility of bribery being involved. Although not so much publicly acknowledged by the breached entities, the insider threat from FBI's investigations are higher than most public estimates. Perhaps they know something others don't know. Other nefarious entities may threaten family or loved ones if they initially refuse to cooperate with the cyber criminals. In one or more cases, the insider made deals with the cyber criminals in advance, before becoming employed with a targeted company. This insider that was hired by the cyber criminals quite often showed up early, worked late, were known to be extremely competent on their job, and even sometimes taking a position at below market wages. The hiring manager often patted themselves on the back for finding such an excellent employee, later only to be found that extremely competent employee costs the company much more in losses than the salary they were paying. My question to you is, how well do you like or trust your employees? And then how well do your employees like you as an employer? This is a very important concept. The absence of evidence does not mean you have the evidence of absence. When there are no controls are bypassed, logs are erased, and you don't have proper visibility, you may have no evidence of malfeasance. That doesn't mean the event did not happen. Sometimes through forensic investigation may uncover malicious behavior. This may require more sophisticated monitoring tools, forwarding all logs to separate protected logging destinations, not accessible from your servers or endpoints. One of the largest complaints by cyber investigators have when investigating a major breach is there are insufficient logs that tell the whole tale of what's happening during that breach. My top-tier red team pen test friends say that they may let you find a few malicious items on purpose by design, giving you a false sense of confidence, while hiding half a dozen malicious mechanisms that the majority of defenders almost never find. You can bet that the sophisticated cyber criminals and nation-state threat actors can and will do the same. People, processes, and technology, they need a refresh at a faster rate. I think the main point here is that the tactics that are being used by cyber criminals and nation states are changing so fast, and our technology is changing so fast that we have to put fire under the people, processes, and technology to refresh everything at a faster rate. One telltale sign is that if all of a sudden you're not seeing any evidence of any attacks at all. Or you might start seeing false positives. And anyway, basically your mechanisms that you're using in your security are not working properly. This may be due to vendors, key personnel leaving, certain vendors selling out to a larger company and again, losing key personnel. Or they may just simply rest on their past laurels, thinking they don't have to continually improve. For whatever reason, if your detection rates decrease and your false positives increase, it's probably time to change vendors. Also, you need to send your people to training, whether it's online training or in person. So keep on, and you may need to review your processes and rewrite your processes. Legitimate software gone bad. I think this was sort of the start of things of what's happening nowadays. In this particular case, some employees downloaded some open source software down from the internet. They downloaded not only the software, but it downloaded a second software. It had legitimate digital certificates. It was from a large brand name, legit digital certificate company. It was also a partner with one of the major top 10 tech firms in the world. And the junior members of the monitoring and incident response team said, since everything looks legitimate, everything's fine. But we saw command and control starting with UDP traffic, and then later went to TLS port 443 traffic. And then it would go every 24 to 48 hours to go from one large cloud provider to another. Eventually, we had forensics look at this particular infection and found out that there were many changes, thousands of changes in just a 48-hour period that were not legitimate. Again, be careful where you download your malware and get your malware. And it may be at times, it may be worth paying a small price for legitimate software so you don't end up getting malware. Of course, this leads, on a small scale, downloading the open source software, you go to the next stage and you have supply chain and mega hacks, just like we've recently had with SolarWinds. And SolarWinds was utilized by 33,000 companies and government entities, and 18,000 of these downloaded the malicious software and were compromised. Many of the U.S. agencies, including the parts of the Pentagon, Department of Homeland Security, State Department, Department of Energy, Nuclear Security Administration, the Treasury, were attacked. And private companies like Microsoft, FireEye, Cisco, Intel, and Deloitte, and other organizations like the California Department of State Hospitals and Kent State University were attacked. It was stealthy. I think this is sort of like going to the next stage. And this is one of the key things that we're going to have to figure out, how to keep third-party actors from not getting their software compromised. Visibility and context. As I mentioned earlier, more traffic is encrypted. This can cause a classical security system to become blind to malicious traffic. You need to see this traffic from endpoint to the internet and from computer to computer. You need methods to see these encrypted flows, or methods to monitor those encrypted flows with metadata from the packets. Your financial people will require the ability to see financial flows in order to optimize your profit or minimize risk in the risk-reward model. The same is needed to optimize a risk model in cybersecurity. And what it comes down to is that we're all going to have to work together to be able to address many of the problems that we see worldwide today. The threats landscape is an extremely dynamic and continues to escalate with speed and sophistication faster than what most security vendors and teams can reliably defend against. No one person, no one technology, no one country, No one continent will be able to solve all these issues alone. We're all connected by networks, systems, technology, and people. Our risk management program and cyber resiliency is only good as our weakest link. We will all have to work together, hand in hand, to develop solutions for the future. Thank you very much, and look forward to our next discussion.
Thank you very much for that, Bob. I think it highly unlikely that the BBC's got any information worth selling, but if so, if you happen to disagree with that, I'm prepared to dob it in for a lot less than £5,000. Message me, needs to go no further, just plain brown envelope, the usual. Bob's staying with us for this next Q&A panel, and Jude McCorry is coming back. But we also have to introduce Holly Grace Williams. Holly is the MD of Secarma. Holly, we haven't heard from you today, so do you want to just sort of lay out your stall for a couple of minutes? Tell us who you are, what do you do?
Hi, my name is Holly Grace Williams, and I generally summarize what I do as I break into computers for a living. So Secarma work in the cybersecurity consultancy space. We specialize in penetration testing and red teaming.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Very brief too, which is always a good point. First question, how have organizational vulnerabilities changed over the last year, particularly with the lockdown disruption? Any thoughts on that? Jude, first start. It'll work better with your microphones on. Go on. Is your microphone working? Give it a go.
Sorry about that. I think that the vulnerabilities have changed in line with what has happened with COVID. So they have been taking opportunities around people working from home, and that people may be not concentrating as much as they should be because they are in that home environment, doing some homeschooling, answering doors for deliveries with Amazon and stuff. And people are taking those opportunistic moments with families and people at home and organizations.
There seemed to be a real change in the appetite for risk, Holly. That, essentially your companies that have for years been tiptoeing around the edge of the cloud all of a sudden just galloped towards it.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the case. I've seen a strong uptake in cloud services with the customers that I've been working in. I think the reason for that is just the agility that the cloud allows you. If you need to make a change very quickly, the cloud enables that. And I think at the beginning of the pandemic, that was something that a lot of organizations hadn't prepared for, was sending all of their workforce to work from home. So even if they had technologies in place like VPNs, virtual private networks, maybe they didn't have the capacity that was required, those kinds of things. And installing these systems using cloud services is a very fast way of doing it.
The vulnerabilities that Jude was talking about, Bob, does that apply in America?
I think the vulnerabilities are happening at a faster and faster pace because there are more and more people like Holly that are looking for these vulnerabilities. One thing that's interesting, though, and this is an article I read recently, in the wild, only about 2.6% of those vulnerabilities that are being found are actually being actively attacked. So, it puts sort of a new light on how you prioritize what you patch first. So I thought that was an interesting statistic.
And what's the nature of the 2.6%? How do they differ? Why?
Yeah, FireEye was looking at all the vulnerabilities, and then they were looking to be seeing what was actually being attacked in the wild. And out of all those vulnerabilities over a period of time, only 2.6% were being attacked on a regular basis. So many of the other vulnerabilities that, where, people might be calling fire, in a theater, some of those vulnerabilities weren't being attacked so much. So it's a much smaller footprint of what was being actually attacked than the entire list of all the known vulnerabilities at the time.
What have been the main threats and attacks that we've seen across this period, Holly?
I think we're seeing an awful lot of phishing, and one of the things that comes up with panel sessions like this is the pedantic side of me, in terms of like when people use terms like vulnerabilities, what do they mean? And we see people saying, vulnerabilities have changed over the last year, and then they talk about phishing as if phishing is new. I think Bob's point there about the number of vulnerabilities being used by threat actors, this 2.6%, definitely should be looked at. I think one of the reasons that might be the case is things like the availability of public exploit code. If hacking tools are available, the frequency of threat groups targeting those will increase. But also consider the counterpoint of how statistics work. If I, as an attacker, compromise 10 accounts for your organization, and then I use one of those to compromise the organization itself, would it be fair to say that only 10% of accounts that are hacked are used? Not really. The statistics can mean different things. I think my feeling in that, and it's just my opinion, is the part of that reason is the availability of that exploit code. There is some vulnerabilities when they are released are either easy to exploit, or somebody has done the hard work and released that publicly, and that changes the threat landscape. It makes it easier for the lower skilled attackers.
What's your thoughts on that, Jude?
Probably, I don't really have any. This is probably more in-depthly technical than what I would be used to speaking about. So I have to agree with what they're saying, but that's not something that we would be looking at on a daily basis here at SBRC.
Yeah. I mean, again, coming back to what you term as social engineering and what most Scots in my age call swicking or cheating, it's basically it's conning people. And we were talking about this earlier this morning. It's relying on people can be quite kind, and they also want to be helpful, Jude. And that's a serious vulnerability. Do you want to train that out of a company?
What do you mean by that? Sorry.
Well, if somebody phones up and says, I'm in real trouble here, I need some help, I need this information, 9 people out of 10, I would say, are probably going to not stop and then think, oh, hang on a second, am I being socially engineered here? Is a guy trying basically to con me, or are they actually just going to give them the information? All
right, yeah, well, so yesterday, I think everybody was hit with the post office spam on their telephone. So the thing. But I think most people are becoming, is this actually a scam rather than is this genuine? Because you're going to get 02 ones every day. There's something different. So I think we need to be more aware, the nicer to act on things, and even things like landlord scams, which happened as well, or here's a new sort code and account number to send the details from, and CEO fraud, all that kind of stuff. Everything has to be checked. You cannot just assume that you're doing the right thing and that you're going to rush a process through, particularly when it is around money in an organization. We can't do that now. There's no such thing as I was being nice and I was getting that information. I was getting that information or that money over as soon as possible.
Yeah. How much is it possible at all to say how the threat landscape is likely to change over the next 12 months or so? Oh.
I think, boy, things just happen every day. Here's a perfect example. With social media and live streaming and just sort of like what we're doing right now. There's a popular app on iPhone called Clubhouse, and that app is only available on iPhone right now. Now, what happened is cyber criminals got together, put together these emails and texts, and they said, "Oh, we have Clubhouse available on Android now." Well, it's not available on Android. The app that the cyber criminals made available was is malware. It was something made to look like Clubhouse, but it wasn't. So those people that downloaded that compromised their Android phone. So it's one opportunity after another. And of course, COVID-19, I think with all the remote work, as Holly had mentioned, everybody's going to the cloud because people aren't going in to put bare metal servers, and the ease of putting new applications in the cloud without, unfortunately, many companies not doing a full risk analysis of what that means on the extended attack surface that takes place by putting apps in the cloud. Anyway, we due to the advanced, speedy digital transformation that's taking place that was spawned by COVID, it has increased our attack surface dramatically. And I don't think there's been enough people to look at and do a full-blown risk analysis properly. So that's an issue.
Well, What's your perception on this, Holly? I mean, you're working at more or less at the top of your profession, and then you get people like me, muggles, asking what to you are probably incredibly stupid questions. But, the fact is, you are versed in this and I am not. So, I mean, how I'm the one that might be causing the point of vulnerability within my organization.
The first thing is be very careful around statistics. You'll see an awful lot of people saying things like, oh, there's been a huge increase in coronavirus-focused phishing attacks. Well, of course there has. There's a novel coronavirus out there. That doesn't mean there's been an increase in phishing attacks in general. And that also doesn't necessarily mean that statistic is useful to your organization. So the first thing is be careful with the statistics, because if you're blindly following them, you might be taking the wrong risk-based approach. The second thing is try not to think of any kind of security breach as a single action. It shouldn't be the case. You have very significant issues if a user can click a link in an email and your entire business fails. There is more to that situation. So whilst we have discussions like this and we talk very simplistically about somebody trying to scam someone or to socially engineer them, to use that term, that is something that we should, dissect and look at how we can improve that situation. But you should be very aware as a business that that single activity is not the entirety of the attack. If I walk into reception doing a physical access assessment to gain access to an office space, that receptionist letting me into the building is one aspect of the wider breach. Surely there's many other people in that office space that should be challenging me for ID and all of those kinds of things. So the failings are often broader than the single action, and only fixating on the single action, you'll miss important details in what we might refer to as the attack chain.
Can I pick up on something that you discussed with Ciaran, Jude? That he was talking about sometime in the future, maybe not that terribly far away, people will be clamoring for the right of safe software. Explain this to me, because as soon as he said that, I thought, well, where are we at the moment? Is this the equivalent of sort of Victorian times of sticking children up chimneys? Essentially that there's very little controls on behaviour that is just frankly unacceptable.
Yeah, and I also would go a step further as well. There's a lot of organizations like Facebook, Instagram, and people like that, the platforms, the social platforms where you can do business and you can set up a micro business, or people can make a lot of money on it. What we've noticed in the last year as well, when things go wrong for these, like the local cake maker, the local person who sells maybe stuff on Etsy and things like that, when things go wrong, the organizations, they don't come forward to try and fix it or help those people either. So I think there should be a duty of care for organizations like that who say, yes, come along, use my platform to sell and to set up your company, that they have to be able to secure those organizations and build a better instant response, be more vocal and more physical in the market as well to make sure that they are protecting these companies that are setting up. It shouldn't be the role of Police Scotland or police forces anywhere else. It should be the role of these organizations that are encouraging companies to set up these businesses with them. And also, yesterday was the Royal Mail scam, pay $2.99 and you will get your package delivered. Everybody is getting packages delivered. So if somebody, and we're talking not just about businesses, we're talking about society in general. So if my dad got that, or my grandmother or my aunt and stuff like that, and they pressed and they paid the $2.99, where was the Royal Mail yesterday? They weren't doing any messaging. They weren't protecting the people in Scotland or in the UK either. So companies will have to, if we're trying to modernize and use IoT and use technology to do business, people will have to stand up with a proper duty of care to protect citizens and businesses in this country.
This question to any of the three of you: how is that change going to happen? Why would companies do that voluntarily? What's in it for them?
Well, one of the things is market forces, right? So if you consider the fact that if an organization was to produce a product, they likely have competition. And if their product is more secure than the competition and therefore costs more because it took longer to develop, would consumers choose the more secure product? I'm sure you can play with those variables to make it so that sometimes they would and sometimes they wouldn't. But explaining the importance of security to the broader public so that they make informed decisions about their purchasing options is very difficult. For one thing, we talk about security in conversations like this as if it's on or off, right? Security in a risk-based approach is a gradient. It's not on or off. So security itself is complex. The buying decisions are complex. And then, as we said, the market forces as well in terms of how do we make businesses even care about the problem is complex.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Bob?
Sure. We do things beyond what our competition does to protect our customers. We block a lot of the malicious domains that are command and control and malware downloads and phishing sites and that sort of thing. And in our reporting, we see the results of tens of thousands of people being protected from getting compromised. Now, on some cases, people have gotten compromised. And what's interesting is that most of the compromises we're seeing is still Microsoft Windows, even on a wireless network. So quite often they got compromised somewhere else by their home ISP or their work ISP, and then they bring it to the wireless network, and we can see that the traffic to the command and control is being blocked. But we do it because it does provide a service to our customer, and it's good to know that they wouldn't get compromised by being on our network. Now the other thing is too, if people are getting phishing texts, what they call smishing, we block those too, to make sure that as soon as we find out the next wave, we block them as soon as we see them. So,
when a company, when there is a breach, when a company is compromised, a company or an organization, and it's obviously there's reputational damage there. This is maybe a naive question, I don't know. Do people get fired within that company for that?
Nowadays, the more enlightened companies generally would not do that unless there was malicious intent or cause. I think you need to look at it as we survive or we thrive as a team. We're successful as a team or we fail as a team. So it takes the entire team to be successful. So that I would say no. That's in prior days that would happen. In current days, it would happen because of malicious or malintent by an employee.
The reason I was asking that is there seems to me to be a trend towards greater openness at the moment. And if you thought you're going to lose your job, I think there might be a tendency just to sort of quietly try and deal with it.
Yeah.
So is that an actual trend?
Yeah.
Is there a trend towards openness around security breaches? There certainly is, because it's being regulated that it's required from an organizational point of view. If an organization is required legally to announce when a breach has occurred, that will force them to perform an investigation, and they might uncover some of these things. Also, to the earlier point, is there a trend around scapegoating individual employees or firing individual employees? It has happened previously. Look at some of the major breaches we've had over the last 3 years. Organizations have called out individuals where a breach has occurred. Do I think that's useful? No, I don't. Do I think organizations are suddenly being, philanthropic with this information and suddenly becoming transparent? I'm sure some of them are, and I'm sure many, many others are doing it simply because the law now requires it of them.
A lot of nodding there, Jude.
So you heard Ciaran Martin earlier on about the weakest link, that they shouldn't be used in relation to organizations. And I say there's not one action, as Holly said earlier on, that will cause this breach. We're doing a lot of work at the moment. We've got 150 senior leaders, board members, non-execs, CEOs joined up on our executive education program around how to take the conversation into the boardroom. Because I think it's unhealthy to look for scapegoats. If you're looking to do an inquiry into an organization, some of the ones that we've worked on in the last few months, police are involved, so it is a police investigation. There aren't many employees. I've never had a police investigation in my work, and it will happen, with some people, some organizations out there. So why put staff through that kind of stress, as well as that I could lose my job over this? And if you have scapegoats, that's wrong of the board even to even discuss something like that, because they all have a part to play in this. Where is the risk appetite? Where is cyber and the risk register to do with the board as well? You can't just blame an employee around this. We all have a part to play in it as board members and CEOs. And if it is a common thing and people are looking for scapegoats, then it won't be discussed. If you came across something, you would try and hide it, which will delay an investigation then as well. So we do need openness and transparency. and also use it as lessons learned. How can you share the lessons learned in your organizations around stuff like this to prevent it in other organizations as well?
Bob, is there enough international cooperation in this sphere?
No, I don't think so. I think it's starting, but also there is the data that can be shared is so immense. It's difficult to share it all and to prioritize exactly what to share. One of the things that I was talking about earlier in my presentation was in many of the traditional threat intel of indicators of compromise that has been distributed among, whether it's free or paid subscription, ends up being a perfectly good view in the rearview mirror. And so, by the time you find IOC, determine it is absolutely an indicator of compromise, and by the time you distribute it, quite often it's come and gone, and it's no longer valid. But I think if you share how it was compromised, what vulnerability was being being leveraged, that sort of thing, those are much more valuable than, say, like IPs and domains and that sort of thing, because those can change in a heartbeat.
Is anybody even discussing so far, Holly, some sort of international reporting of attacks and breaches?
Definitely, as Bob mentions, there are things like threat intelligence sharing schemes, either at a corporate level where companies share information with each other, or even at a governmental level. That is a thing that exists. But one of the things to bear in mind when you're looking at this is the distinction between data, information, and intelligence. So, for example, data is usually not useful. If I give you all of the data that my firewalls are gathering about all of the traffic that passes through them, that wouldn't be meaningful to you. These two machines talk to each other. If we go up a step from that and we organize data, it becomes information. And we look at, this server, this specific IP address, and another IP address talk to each other. That's more useful, but again, it's missing context. And turning that into intelligence would be saying this server talked with another server, which is a known attacker's server. So just sharing data, just having that ability to share between organizations or at a governmental level isn't necessarily useful without the context that goes alongside that. Some organizations are not yet open to sharing. I've seen it working with some companies where the idea of telling their competitors the kinds of attacks that they're facing is something that unnerves them. But hopefully everybody in this panel and everybody who's listening can see there is a benefit to that. If I tell you as a similar organization to yourselves, these are the attacks that we're facing, these are the ways that we're countering them, this is what's effective, that's useful to everyone, and that makes a more secure operating environment.
And I agree with Holly as well. I think people behind the data sharing thing, we can't share data, it's illegal, we're not allowed to do this. And some of it is not data, some of it's just intelligence sharing, and we need to. And also sometimes there's too much data and too much intelligence to come in to go, what is this? Is we're being bombarded. So where is the relevant intelligence? Where's the relevant data? And also using things like data science and AI as well. You're crossing that with cybersecurity as well to look at those nuggets of information that are going to help protect countries and organizations.
Looking ahead to the next 12 months, this has been an exceptional last 12 months, but looking ahead to the next 12 months, are you optimistic? Well, Jude's not. Start.
I think because of some of the high profile attacks we've had in Scotland, and that's not a good thing, but the good thing that's come out of it is the information sharing and the lessons learned. So the likes of SEPA as well, who didn't pay the ransomware, and they have to be commended on that. And I know it wasn't one person, again, it was a board, and it was, other people and other organizations in Scotland that made that decision. So by standing up, and it's more pain not to pay the ransomware, but it is the right thing to do. And by doing that and sharing that information and putting their head above the parapet and saying, this is what happened to us, this is what can happen to you guys, and basically showing organizations in Scotland they need to be prepared instead of, prevent and protect rather than looking at the afterthought of it. And or there's a few other high-profile hits as well. And also, I think people know that they've got away with a lot from working from home and maybe not having the right procedures in place, that they're kind of going, let's get this right now. We've had a year to get this right. And I see Scottish government, very, very supportive of the SME community and everything they're trying to do. But I do think businesses need to do more and step up to the challenge more to try and protect themselves as well, because you can't, as I said, depend on if something goes wrong, everybody calls Police Scotland or everybody calls Scottish Government to say we need help. There's a lot of things people can do to help themselves now.
Is optimism something you flirt with, Holly?
I work in cybersecurity, so I'm professionally cynical. Ransomware has been around since 1989. I'm sure we'll work out how to stop it one day. It hasn't happened yet. I think organizations need to, pay attention to panels like this. They need to pay attention to events like this and realize that these threats have been around for a long time. And that means there's a lot of information out there that can help you to learn about how they work and how to protect them. Do I think we will make a significant leap forwards in the next 12 months? Probably not, but we might be allowed to see each other in person again soon, which would be nice.
Finally, Bob.
Yes. In the near term, I have tendency to be a little more cynical, like Holly. I've seen too many things too often to think any different. However, I am seeing some things that are starting to happen. Zero trust, where people are starting to attempt to implement zero trust. We talk about advanced levels of encryption that could be helpful in the future. If I had a young child that was born today, I would say that I would not recommend them to go into cybersecurity, because I'm hoping 20 years from now it will be much better. If somebody's coming out of school today, probably cybersecurity would be a good career to go into, and you will keep plenty busy for quite some time. So optimism in the short run, we have a lot of work to do. Optimism in the long run, I think we'll get there eventually, but it's not going to be without some pain and suffering and a lot of work.
Thank you all very much for that session, and thanks for your ideas and comments. Holly Grace Williams, Bob Carver, and Jude McCorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank all our speakers and sponsors today. To point out, the exhibition zone will remain open until about 4:30 this afternoon. There's still competitions and prizes to be found there. If you can get the chance, fill out the conference survey. It doesn't take long, it's a couple of minutes, and give us your feedback. There is a chance to win one or two £50 Amazon vouchers there. Just open your briefcase, your virtual briefcase now, to find the survey. Just point out the upcoming events. Digit's next virtual conferences are the Digital Energy Summit. That's on Thursday, the 22nd of April, and the Digit Leaders Summit on Wednesday, the 26th of May. You can secure a place in either of those by visiting the Digit booth in the exhibition hall. If you're not intending hanging around, please log out at the end of the day. In fact, even if you are intending hanging around, log out at the end of the day, because we want you to re-log in again tomorrow morning, because the entire platform is going to be refreshed for day 2. I hope you found today useful and informative. From myself, Mark Stephen, thank you very much for your attention, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.